The courtroom buzzed with quiet murmurs as a young boy stood at the center, clutching a folded piece of paper in his trembling hands. His dark eyes flicked nervously between the judge and the gathered crowd. Judge Olivia Thompson, a woman in her early 60s with kind but sharp eyes behind her glasses, beckoned him forward. The room fell silent as the boy approached, his steps hesitant, yet purposeful. When he finally handed over the paper, the judge unfolded it with an air of curiosity, expecting a few scrawled words at most. What she read made her pause. Her usually composed expression softened into something raw and human, her lips parting slightly as if to speak. But no words came. The courtroom waited, breath held collectively. Whatever the boy had written had pierced through the formalities of the legal setting and laid bare a deep, universal truth. How had this child's words stopped an entire room in its tracks? What could have driven him to write such a note? The answers would unfold as his story was told, a tale of fear, bravery, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her son. The dim glow of a single lamp illuminated the Browns' modest living room. Jaden, just 13, crouched behind the worn brown couch, his small frame tucked tightly into the space between the cushions and the wall. The phone in his hands felt heavy, his knuckles white as he gripped it close to his mouth. "Please, you have to hurry," he whispered, his voice cracking under the weight of his fear. From the kitchen came the sound of breaking glass, sharp and violent, followed by his mother's pleading cry. "What's your address, honey?" The calm, professional voice of the 911 operator came through the phone, grounding him amidst the chaos. 1247 Pinewood Avenue, he replied, his voice barely more than a breath. "Help is on the way. Stay on the line with me, okay?" Jaden flinched as his father's angry voice boomed from the kitchen. "Where's the damn money, Diane? Don't lie to me." "I don't have any more, Tyler." His mother's voice wavered, trying to hold firm. "Everything's gone. I spent it on groceries and the electric bill. There's nothing left." "Bull!" Tyler shouted, and another crash followed. This time, the sound of plates shattering against the floor. Jaden pressed himself further into the corner, his small body trembling as tears streamed down his face. He tried to keep his breathing quiet, fearing that even the faintest sound might give away his hiding spot. "You think you're smarter than me, huh?" Tyler's voice was a dangerous growl now, slurred and heavy with alcohol. His footsteps staggered, each one louder as he approached the living room. "Where's that smart-ass kid of yours? Where's Jaden hiding?" "He's not here," Diane shouted back, desperation creeping into her tone. "He's at the library, studying." "Studying," Tyler mocked, his voice dripping with venom. "Always studying. Like he's too good to be here, too good for me. Both of you think you're so much better than me, don't you?" The operator's voice came through the phone again, steady and soothing. "You're doing great, Jaden. Stay hidden. The officers are almost there, just a few more minutes." Jaden nodded silently, though the operator couldn't see him. His father's shadow loomed on the wall, flickering in and out as he paced erratically. Tyler's movements were unpredictable, knocking over a chair one moment, pausing to catch his breath the next. A framed family photo on the mantel caught his eye, and with a burst of rage, he swiped it to the ground. The sound of breaking glass reverberated through the house. "I work hard," Tyler muttered, his voice rising again. "I bust my ass, and this is what I get? A wife who doesn't respect me and a kid who hides like a coward?" Jaden clutched the fabric of his jeans with his free hand, his nails digging into the worn denim. He dared not move, even as his father's footsteps grew louder, circling the room. "Please, Tyler." Diane's voice broke through the tension, quivering but determined. "You're drunk. You need to calm down. You're scaring Jaden." The sharp crack of a slap echoed like a gunshot, cutting her off mid-sentence. Jaden bit down hard on his lip to stifle the cry that threatened to escape. He could hear his mother stumble, her body colliding with the kitchen counter. His vision blurred with tears, his small chest heaving silently. Through the phone, the faint sound of sirens became audible. The operator's voice dropped to a whisper. "They're almost there, Jaden, just a little longer." The blue and red lights of the approaching police cars cast eerie patterns on the walls, signaling the end of Tyler's tirade. "What did you do?" Tyler demanded, his voice turning from rage to suspicion. You called them, didn't you, Diane? No, I didn't, Diane protested, her words rushed and frantic. You're lying! Tyler's tone grew more dangerous, laced with panic. The wail of the sirens was deafening now, and the crunch of tires on gravel outside was unmistakable. Police! Open the door! Jaden held his breath as the front door burst open, heavy boots stomping into the house. The commanding voices of the officers filled the air. Everyone stay where you are! Tyler's protests were immediate and loud, but they were quickly muffled as officers restrained him. The sound of handcuffs clicking into place was a small but powerful relief to Jaden's ears. It's okay to come out now, the operator said gently through the phone. You're safe, Jaden. The officers are there. Jaden peeked out from behind the couch, his body still shaking. He saw 2 officers leading his father out the door, his drunken shouts fading as they dragged him toward the waiting patrol car. Another officer, a woman with a kind face and a badge that read, Officer Carter, approached the kitchen. Ma'am, are you all right? She asked Diane, who was slumped against the counter, her lip bleeding and her arms clutching her side. Diane nodded weakly, but her eyes searched the room until they landed on Jaden. She managed a small, tearful smile. Jaden, she called softly. The boy stood slowly, still clutching the phone as if it were his last connection to safety. Diane opened her arms and he rushed into them, burying his face in her shoulder. My brave boy, she whispered, her voice breaking. You're so brave. Officer Carter knelt beside them, her expression warm and reassuring. You did the right thing, Jaden. You kept your mom safe. That was very brave of you. Elle trembling, but his heart beginning to steady. Outside, the patrol car's engine roared to life, and Tyler's muffled shouting grew fainter as it pulled away. Jaden clung to his mother, tears dampening the fabric of her blouse. Diane stroked his hair, her touch steady despite the pain etched across her face. Officer Carter crouched to meet Jaden's eyes, her smile gentle but firm. Jaden, I need to talk to your mom for a moment. Do you think you can sit right here and wait for me? Jaden hesitated, then nodded. He let his mother guide him to a nearby chair. As the officers documented Diane's injuries and the state of the house, Jaden sat quietly, his small hands gripping the edge of his seat. His gaze wandered to the shattered photo frame on the floor, the once happy family captured within now fragmented and distorted by the broken glass. After several minutes, Officer Carter returned, crouching beside Jaden again. You're safe now, she said softly. Your dad can't hurt you or your mom anymore. Do you understand that? Jaden nodded again, though his small shoulders remained tense. We're going to make sure you're both okay, the officer continued, her tone soothing but firm. And if you ever feel scared again, you call us right away. Promise? I promise, Jaden whispered. Diane joined them, her steps slow and careful. She crouched beside Jaden, pulling him into another hug. You saved us, she murmured, her voice thick with emotion. My brave, brave boy. 3 days later, Jaden found himself in an unfamiliar setting, a courtroom. The tall wooden benches and high ceilings made him feel small, the faint echo of every sound amplifying his unease. He wore the navy blue sweater his mother had ironed for him that morning, and his hand clutched hers tightly as they stood before Judge Olivia Thompson. Diane wore her best dress, but even the carefully applied makeup couldn't fully conceal the fading bruises on her face. She held her chin high, though her grip on Jaden's hand betrayed her lingering fear. Across the room, Tyler sat at the defendant's table, clad in an orange jumpsuit. He looked smaller than Jaden remembered, his shoulders hunched and his eyes avoiding their gaze. Judge Thompson adjusted her glasses and cleared her throat. In the matter of the state versus Tyler Brown, she began, her voice clear and authoritative. This court has reviewed the evidence presented, including Mrs. Diane Brown's testimony, the medical reports, and the 911 call placed by the minor, Jaden Brown. Jaden felt his mother's hand squeeze his own. He stood a little taller, remembering the officer's words about his bravery. Judge Thompson continued, her tone growing sterner as she addressed Tyler directly. Mr. Brown, your actions have caused significant harm to your family, both physical and emotional. This court is particularly disturbed by the fact that your violent behavior occurred in the presence of your minor son. Tyler's head hung low, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. Furthermore, the judge said, her voice firm, your prior convictions for drug possession and the evidence of ongoing substance abuse demonstrate a pattern of disregard for both the law and your family's well-being. Taking all of this into account, this court sentences you to 5 years in state prison. Additionally, you will be required to complete anger management and substance abuse programs during your incarceration. The gavel struck with finality, the sharp sound echoing through the courtroom. Tyler was escorted out by the bailiff, his once threatening presence reduced to a subdued shuffle. Jaden turned to his mother, his expression a mix of relief and uncertainty. Mom, what happens now? Diane knelt beside him, her hands resting on his shoulders. We move forward, she said softly. We're free now. We can start fresh. Judge Thompson removed her glasses and stepped down from her bench, her expression softening as she approached Diane and Jaden. Mrs. Brown, Jaden, she said warmly. Please stay for a moment. I'd like to speak with you. As the courtroom emptied, the judge knelt to meet Jaden's eye level. Young man, she said, her voice gentle. What you did took incredible courage. You protected your mother when she needed you the most. That's something you should be very proud of. Jaden nodded solemnly, his small shoulders straightening at her words. Turning to Diane, Judge Thompson added, My clerk will provide you with information about resources available to you and Jaden, counseling, financial assistance, anything you need to rebuild. Please don't hesitate to reach out. Tears welled in Diane's eyes as she nodded. Thank you, Your Honor, for everything. As the court proceedings wrapped up, Jaden fidgeted with a folded piece of paper in his pocket. His small fingers traced its edges, worn soft from constant handling. Taking a deep breath, he stepped forward. Excuse me, Your Honor, he said softly. Judge Thompson turned, her expression brightening at the sight of him. Yes, Jaden? With trembling hands, he pulled out the paper and held it up to her. I wrote this for you, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The judge accepted the note, unfolding it carefully. The childish handwriting read simply, Please don't take my mom away. Judge Thompson's lips parted as she read the words. She knelt again, her gaze meeting Jaden's tearful eyes. Oh, sweetheart, she said, her voice filled with warmth. I'm not taking your mom away. Your dad will be going to jail, but you and your mom are safe now. Jaden's lower lip trembled as he glanced at Diane. But Mom's sick, he said, his voice cracking. The doctor said she's not getting better. Diane's face paled, her hands flying to Jaden's shoulders. Jaden, honey, we don't need to... But it's true, Jaden cried, tears streaming down his cheeks. You're not telling them. We don't have money for the medicine and you're getting worse. The courtroom, though nearly empty, felt suddenly too large, the silence deafening. Judge Thompson's kind eyes turned serious as she looked at Diane. Mrs. Brown, she said gently, is this true? Diane hesitated, her composure faltering. I didn't want to bring it up, she admitted, her voice trembling. This trial was about Tyler, not me. I didn't want to seem like I was looking for sympathy. Judge Thompson placed a hand on Jaden's shoulder. Thank you for telling me, Jaden, she said softly. You're very brave. Looking back at Diane, she continued. There are programs that can help, resources that might be able to cover the cost of treatment. Let's discuss this further. I promise you won't face this alone. Diane wiped her eyes, her grip on Jaden tightening as she nodded. Thank you, Your Honor. We're grateful. Truly. The drive home from the courthouse was quiet, the hum of the car engine filling the silence between Jaden and his mother. Diane kept her eyes on the road, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. Jaden sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window. The words he'd said in court hung heavily between them. When they arrived at their small, weathered house, Diane unlocked the door and stepped inside, setting her purse on the scratched kitchen table. She turned to Jaden, her face calm but serious. "Sweetheart," she began softly, sitting down and motioning for him to join her. "We need to talk about today, what you said in the courtroom." "Did I do something wrong?" Jaden interrupted, his voice small. Diane shook her head and reached for his hand. "No, honey, you didn't do anything wrong. But there are some things we don't need to share with other people even if they're trying to help. Some things are just for family." "But Mom," Jaden protested, his eyes filling with tears. "I'm scared. I don't want to lose you. How are we going to pay for your medicine? What's going to happen to us?" His words broke Diane's heart. She pulled him into a tight embrace, holding him as he sobbed into her shoulder. The weight of her son's fear, combined with her own, felt unbearable, but she refused to let it show. "Things will work out, sweetheart," she whispered, running her fingers through his hair. "We'll figure this out. God has a plan for us. We just have to stay strong and have faith." Jaden pulled back slightly, his tear-streaked face full of worry. "But how, Mom? We barely have enough money for food. How are we going to pay for the medicine?" Diane forced a smile, wiping his cheeks with her thumbs. "That's not something you need to worry about, okay? I'll take care of it. You just focus on being the amazing, brave boy you are. Remember what I always tell you?" Jaden sniffled, his voice quiet. "Where there's life, there's hope." "That's right," Diane said, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "And as long as we have each other, we'll be okay." Jaden nodded, though the worry didn't entirely leave his face. Diane gently urged him to go wash up while she started preparing dinner. As soon as Jaden was out of sight, Diane sank into a chair, pressing her hand to her mouth to stifle a sob. Her shoulders shook as the reality of their situation crashed down on her. The mounting medical bills, the empty bank account, the gnawing weakness in her body. It all felt insurmountable. But when she heard Jaden's footsteps returning, she quickly wiped her tears, straightened her posture, and forced a smile onto her face. She couldn't let him see her fear. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, the kind of day that hinted at the coming winter. Diane woke early, her body heavy with fatigue but her mind determined. She pulled on her worn robe and shuffled to the front door to retrieve the mail. Inside the mailbox, nestled among bills and advertisements, was an envelope bearing the official seal of the courthouse. Diane's heart quickened as she carried it inside, her hands trembling slightly. She sat at the kitchen table, carefully opening the letter. As she read, her eyes widened. The letter detailed financial assistance from a court-managed fund, providing them with $1,000 a month for living expenses and medical needs. Additionally, the court had assigned them a caretaker to help with household tasks and ensure Diane could focus on her recovery. Tears of relief filled her eyes. For the first time in months, she felt a glimmer of hope. "Mom?" Jaden's sleepy voice came from the stairs. "Are you okay?" Diane quickly wiped her tears and turned to her son, who stood in his pajamas, his hair tousled. "Come here, sweetheart," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I have something wonderful to show you." Jaden approached cautiously, his brow furrowed with concern. Diane pulled him into a hug and showed him the letter. "Judge Thompson sent this," she explained, her voice trembling with gratitude. "We're going to get help. Enough money to cover food, bills, and even my medicine, and someone's going to come help us around the house." "Really?" Jaden's eyes lit up with hope. So you can get better now?" Diane nodded, holding him close. "Yes, sweetheart. Things are going to get better." I promise. Jaden hugged her tightly, his small arms wrapped around her as if trying to protect her from the world. Later that week, a sharp knock echoed through the Browns' small home. Diane opened the door to find a young woman standing there, her blonde hair neatly styled and her clothes impossibly pristine. She looked out of place in the worn-down neighborhood, her designer handbag dangling from her arm. "I'm Amy," she said flatly, her tone devoid of warmth. "I'm here for the court-ordered caretaker duties." Diane smiled politely, ignoring the woman's stiff demeanor. "Thank you for coming. Please come in." Amy hesitated, her nose wrinkling slightly as she stepped inside. Her eyes scanned the modest living room, taking in the worn furniture and scuffed floors with barely concealed disdain. Diane gestured toward the couch. "Why don't we sit and talk about how this will work?" Amy shook her head, her tone clipped. "I don't need to sit. Just tell me what needs to be done and I'll get started. The judge said I need to be here 3 days a week, 9 to 5. Diane's smile faltered slightly, but she nodded. "Of course. Mostly it's just helping with housework, cooking, and running errands when I'm not feeling well." "Fine," Amy said, already typing something into her phone. "I'll start tomorrow." As Amy turned to leave, Jaden appeared in the hallway, watching the interaction with wide eyes. He tugged at Diane's sleeve. "Mom, is she going to help us?" Diane crouched to his level, brushing his hair back. "Yes, sweetheart. She's here to help us." Jaden glanced back at Amy, whose cold demeanor didn't match the kindness he'd expected. Something about her made him uneasy, but he nodded and returned to his homework. Amy arrived the next morning at precisely 9 o'clock. She knocked on the door sharply, her polished nails tapping impatiently as she waited. When Diane opened the door, Amy stepped inside without a word, her designer shoes clicking on the scratched wooden floor. "Good morning," Diane greeted warmly. "Can I get you some coffee or tea before you start?" Amy shook her head. "No, thank you. Let's just get this over with." "What do you need done today?" Diane's polite smile didn't falter. "The floors need mopping, and if you could start a load of laundry, that would be a big help. I'm feeling a little tired today." Amy nodded curtly and set to work. Her movements were efficient but mechanical, her eyes carefully avoiding Diane and Jaden as she went about her tasks. She cleaned the floors, folded laundry, and ran errands, all without complaint, but also without kindness. When Jaden tried to engage her, showing her one of his drawings from school, Amy barely glanced at it before muttering, "That's nice," and returning to her work. Her detachment was palpable, a barrier neither Diane nor Jaden could penetrate. Days turned into weeks, and Amy's routine became predictable. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, she arrived at 9, completed her assigned duties, and left promptly at 5. While her work was thorough, her interactions with the Browns remained cold and distant. Diane noticed the way Amy's gaze lingered judgmentally on their worn furniture and frayed curtains. She ignored the subtle sighs and occasional eye rolls, focusing instead on the relief of having someone to help with the daily grind. Jaden, however, found it harder to ignore Amy's demeanor. He watched her warily, sensing her discomfort in their home. One day, as Amy folded laundry in the living room, Jaden sat nearby, sketching in his notebook. "Why don't you like us?" he asked suddenly, his young voice startling in its directness. Amy froze, her hands hovering over a folded shirt. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her tone defensive. "You never smile," Jaden said, "and you don't talk to us. You act like you don't want to be here." Amy hesitated, her carefully composed mask slipping for a moment. She looked at Jaden, seeing not just a curious boy, but someone who had been through far too much for his age. "It's not that," she said finally, her voice softer than usual. "I'm just not used to this kind of work." Jaden tilted his head, his brown eyes searching hers. "What kind of work?" Amy didn't answer. She turned back to the laundry, folding the rest in silence. One crisp October morning, Diane woke feeling weaker than usual. The chemotherapy was taking its toll, leaving her nauseous and exhausted. She struggled to get out of bed, her limbs heavy and uncooperative. When Amy arrived, Diane met her at the door, her pale face and trembling hands betraying her condition. "Can you handle the grocery shopping today?" Diane asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not feeling well enough to leave the house." Amy frowned but nodded. "Sure. Just give me a list." Diane handed her a handwritten note and some cash, then sank onto the couch, closing her eyes. Jaden sat beside her, worry etched into his small face. "Mom, are you okay?" he asked softly. Diane forced a smile. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just a little tired." Jaden didn't look convinced, but he leaned against her shoulder, offering silent comfort. When Amy returned with the groceries, she placed the bags on the kitchen counter without a word. As she put the items away, she glanced at Diane and Jaden on the couch. Something about the scene made her pause. "You should rest," Amy said abruptly, her voice lacking its usual sharpness. Diane looked up, surprised. "I'm trying," she replied with a weak smile. Amy hesitated, then added, "I can stay a little later today if you need more help." Diane blinked, caught off guard by the unexpected offer. "That's kind of you, Amy. Thank you." Amy shrugged, brushing off the comment, but her actions spoke louder than her words. She stayed until well past her usual time, cleaning the house and even helping Jaden with his homework. Though her demeanor remained distant, her gestures hinted at a crack in her icy exterior. Over the next few weeks, Amy's attitude began to shift, almost imperceptibly at first. She started asking Diane how she was feeling and occasionally lingered in the kitchen after finishing her tasks, chatting awkwardly but earnestly. One afternoon, as she peeled potatoes for dinner, Amy glanced at Diane, who was sitting at the table reviewing medical bills. "Is there anyone else helping you?" Amy asked suddenly. Diane looked up, startled by the question. "No," she admitted. "It's just me and Jaden." Amy nodded, her expression unreadable. After a long pause, she said, "That's a lot to handle." Diane smiled faintly. "It is, but I manage. Jaden helps more than he should. He's such a good boy." Amy didn't respond, but her hands moved a little faster as she prepared the meal. Jaden, ever observant, noticed the subtle changes in Amy's behavior. She still carried herself with a certain aloofness, but there were moments, small, fleeting ones, where her guard seemed to drop. One day he approached her as she tidied the living room. "Do you have a family?" he asked curiously. Amy stiffened but didn't look at him. "Why do you ask?" "I was just wondering," Jaden said. "You don't talk about yourself," Amy sighed, setting down the stack of magazines she had been organizing. "I don't have a family like yours," she said quietly. "It's just me." Jaden frowned, his young mind struggling to comprehend her words. "That must be lonely." Amy's lips pressed into a thin line. "It's fine. I'm used to it." Jaden didn't say anything else, but his gaze lingered on her as she resumed her work. The weeks passed, and though Diane's health continued to decline, the household found a rhythm. Amy's visits had become less transactional and more integral to their routine. She still maintained a professional distance, but there were moments, brief flashes, where genuine care peeked through the cracks in her stoic facade. One chilly afternoon, as the first signs of winter settled over the neighborhood, Diane sat at the kitchen table, sorting through a stack of medical bills. Her hands trembled slightly as she held one particularly large invoice. She hadn't told Jaden just how dire their financial situation had become. Amy entered the kitchen, carrying a basket of freshly folded laundry. She paused when she saw Diane's weary expression. Without thinking, she set the basket down and stepped closer. "Do you need help with that?" she asked, her tone unusually gentle. Diane looked up, startled by the offer. "Oh, no, it's fine," she said quickly, trying to force a smile. "Just some paperwork." Amy didn't press further, but she couldn't shake the image of Diane's pale, exhausted face. For the first time, she found herself wondering how much longer Diane could keep going. Jaden, meanwhile, had grown more accustomed to Amy's presence. He still missed the warmth and familiarity of life before everything fell apart, but he had begun to see Amy as part of their odd, patched-together family. One evening, as Amy prepared dinner, Jaden stood at the counter, watching her chop vegetables with precise, almost mechanical movements. "Amy," he said suddenly, his voice cutting through the quiet. "What is it?" she replied without looking up. "Do you think my mom's going to get better?" Amy froze, the knife hovering midair. She turned to look at him, her expression unreadable. "I don't know, Jaden," she said honestly, "but I think she's doing everything she can to try." Jaden nodded, his small face serious. "I hope so. I don't know what I'd do without her." Amy swallowed hard, turning back to the cutting board. "She's lucky to have you," she said softly. Later that night, after Amy had gone home, Diane sat with Jaden on the couch. The evening news played softly in the background, but neither of them was paying attention. "Mom?" Jaden said, his voice hesitant. "Yes, sweetheart," Diane replied, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "Do you think Amy likes us?" Diane tilted her head, surprised by the question. "Why do you ask?" "I don't know," Jaden said, shrugging. "She's nicer now than she was at first, but she still seems sad." Diane considered this, her eyes distant. "People carry all kinds of burdens, Jaden. Sometimes they don't know how to put them down." Jaden frowned. "Do you think she's carrying a burden?" Diane smiled faintly. "Maybe. It's hard to say. But if she is, we can show her that she's not alone. Sometimes kindness is the best thing you can offer someone." Jaden nodded thoughtfully, leaning his head against his mother's shoulder. The next morning, Amy arrived at the Browns' home to find Jaden waiting for her on the front steps, bundled in his winter coat. He held a small, brightly wrapped package in his hands. "What's that?" Amy asked, raising an eyebrow. "It's for you," Jaden said, holding the package out to her. Amy stared at the gift, her expression a mix of surprise and suspicion. "Why?" "Because you help us," Jaden said simply. "And because it's almost Christmas." Amy hesitated, her hands hovering over the package as if it might bite her. Finally, she took it and unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a small hand-painted ornament shaped like a snowflake. The edges were uneven, and the paint job was far from professional, but it was clear that Jaden had made it himself. "I painted it at school," Jaden explained. "I thought you might like it." Amy's lips parted, but no words came. She stared at the ornament, her grip tightening around it. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice barely audible. Jaden beamed, his smile lighting up his face. "You're welcome." Amy didn't know what to say. She slipped the ornament into her coat pocket and cleared her throat. "Let's get inside, it's freezing out here." That small gesture seemed to shift something in Amy. Over the following weeks, she began to soften even more. She started asking Jaden about school and offering to help him with his homework. She even began sharing small details about her own life, a favorite book, a childhood memory. Nothing too personal, but enough to show she was letting her guard down. For Diane, the change was a blessing. She saw how Jaden's face lit up when Amy paid him attention, and how her own workload lightened as Amy took on more responsibilities without being asked. One evening, as Amy helped Diane prepare dinner, she glanced at the older woman and said, "You've got a good kid." Diane smiled, her face lighting up despite her fatigue. "I know. He's my miracle." Amy nodded, her gaze distant. "You're lucky," she said softly. Diane looked at her curiously. "Do you have any family, Amy?" Amy hesitated, then shook her head. "Not really." "I'm sorry," Diane said sincerely. "Everyone deserves to have someone to lean on." Amy didn't respond, but something in her eyes shifted. A flicker of vulnerability she quickly hid. As Jaden's academic talents became more evident, opportunities began to open for him that once seemed like distant dreams. His biology teacher, Ms. Carter, encouraged him to apply for a prestigious summer program at a local university. "You have the potential to do something truly extraordinary, Jaden," she said after class one day, handing him a brochure for the program. "This could be a great stepping stone for your future." Jaden brought the brochure home that evening, holding it nervously as he showed it to his mother. Martha sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. Though her energy had returned, she still carried a quiet weariness that came from years of battling illness. "Mom, do you think I could—" Jaden's voice trailed off, his uncertainty clear. Martha opened the brochure, scanning the description of the program. Her eyes lit up as she read about the hands-on research opportunities and mentorship it offered. "Of course you can," she said firmly, meeting his gaze. "This is exactly the kind of opportunity you've been working so hard for." "But it's expensive," Jaden said, hesitating. "Even with the scholarship, there's still a fee." Martha reached out, placing her hand over his. "We'll find a way," she assured him. "Don't worry about the cost. You focus on writing the best application you can." Jaden nodded, his resolve strengthening. "I won't let you down, Mom." The weeks leading up to the application deadline were filled with late nights and careful revisions. Jaden poured his heart into his personal statement, describing his passion for science and his dream of becoming a doctor. Martha read every draft, offering gentle suggestions and unwavering encouragement. "You've got a gift, sweetheart," she told him one evening as they sat side by side at the kitchen table. "Your words are going to make them see it too." The day he submitted the application, Jaden felt a mix of relief and nervous anticipation. He wouldn't know the results for weeks, but he allowed himself a small moment of pride. He had given it his all. Life at home continued to improve as well. With the court funds now fully accounted for, Martha could focus entirely on her recovery. Mrs. Thompson proved to be an invaluable support, taking care of the household tasks that Martha couldn't manage on her own. "I made your favorite soup today, Martha," Mrs. Thompson said one afternoon, setting a steaming bowl on the kitchen table. "And I baked some cookies for Jaden. That boy deserves all the treats in the world with how hard he's been working." Martha smiled warmly. "You've been such a blessing to us, Mrs. Thompson. I don't know how we'd manage without you." Mrs. Thompson waved her hand dismissively. "You two are family to me now. Helping you is the least I can do." When the letter from the summer program finally arrived, Jaden found himself too nervous to open it. He handed the envelope to Martha, his hands trembling slightly. "Do you want me to read it for you?" she asked gently. He nodded, unable to find his voice. Martha carefully tore open the envelope and unfolded the letter. Her eyes scanned the first few lines, and then a wide smile spread across her face. "Congratulations, Jaden," she exclaimed, pulling him into a tight hug. "You got in." Jaden's eyes widened in disbelief. "Really? I did?" "Yes, sweetheart," Martha said, tears of pride streaming down her face. "You did it." Jaden held the letter in his hands, reading the words over and over, as if to make sure they were real. "Thank you, Mom," he said softly, "for believing in me." Martha cupped his face in her hands, her expression full of love. "You've always had it in you, Jaden. I just helped you see it." The summer program turned out to be a life-changing experience for Jaden. He spent 6 weeks immersed in research projects, learning from some of the best minds in the field. His mentors marveled at his curiosity and dedication, often telling him he had the potential to achieve great things. One evening, as he worked late in the lab, his mentor, Dr. Hayes, approached him with a thoughtful expression. "Jaden," she said, "have you ever considered applying to a university like Stanford or Harvard? You have the kind of talent they look for." Jaden blinked, taken aback. "Me? At a place like that?" "Why not?" Dr. Hayes said with a smile. "You've got the grades, the drive, and the story to make it happen. Don't sell yourself short." When the program ended, Jaden returned home with a newfound sense of purpose. He shared everything he had learned with Martha, who listened with pride shining in her eyes. "That sounds incredible, Jaden," she said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset. "I can't wait to see all the amazing things you're going to do." Jaden looked at his mother, his heart swelling with gratitude. "It's all because of you, Mom. You've always been my biggest inspiration." Martha smiled, her eyes glistening. "And you've always been my greatest blessing." As the autumn days grew shorter and the air turned crisp, Jaden threw himself into his senior year of high school. His acceptance into the summer program had earned him recognition among his teachers and peers, and he became a leader in both his science club and student council. But at home, his focus remained steadfast on Martha. Though her health had improved significantly, the lingering effects of her treatments left her tired more often than not. Jaden made it a point to handle as much as he could, from cooking dinner to running errands so she could rest. "Mom, you've done so much for me," he told her one evening as he served her a bowl of her favorite chicken noodle soup. "It's my turn to take care of you." Martha smiled softly, though her heart ached with both pride and guilt. "You're a good son, Jaden. But don't forget to take care of yourself, too. You have your own dreams to chase." "I'm doing both," he assured her, his tone firm. "Taking care of you is part of my dream." One day after school, Jaden arrived home to find Mrs. Thompson and Martha deep in conversation at the kitchen table. He set his backpack down and joined them, sensing the serious tone of their discussion. "What's going on?" he asked, looking between them. Martha hesitated before responding. "We were talking about college applications," she said carefully. "Mrs. Thompson was just suggesting a few schools you might want to consider." Jaden's brow furrowed. "I've already decided. I'm going to stay local and go to state college. That way I can still be here for you." Mrs. Thompson's kind eyes softened as she placed a hand on his arm. "Jaden, it's wonderful that you want to stay close to your mom, but you're capable of so much more. You should aim high. Schools like Stanford, Harvard, or MIT. "I can't leave Mom," Jaden said firmly, his jaw tightening. "She needs me." Martha reached for his hand, her touch gentle but insistent. "Sweetheart, I'll always need you in my heart, but I don't want to hold you back. This is your chance to do something incredible. Please, at least think about it." Jaden looked down at their joined hands, his mind racing. He wanted to argue, but deep down, he knew his mother was right. That weekend, Jaden sat down at the kitchen table with a stack of college brochures and his laptop. Martha joined him, her energy better than usual that day. Together, they researched application requirements, scholarship opportunities, and campus life. "Did you know MIT has a program where undergrads can start doing research in their first year?" Jaden said excitedly, his eyes lighting up as he read. Martha smiled, thrilled to see her son so engaged. "That sounds perfect for you, sweetheart. You've always been curious about how things work." They worked late into the night, fueled by cups of hot cocoa and Martha's gentle encouragement. By the time they finished, Jaden had a solid list of schools he wanted to apply to, including several Ivy League universities. "I'm proud of you, Jaden," Martha said as she kissed his forehead. "You're going to change the world." The months that followed were a whirlwind of application deadlines, essays, and recommendation letters. Jaden's teachers, particularly Ms. Carter and Mr. Roberts, rallied behind him, providing glowing endorsements of his abilities and character. "He's one of the brightest students I've ever taught," Mr. Roberts wrote in his recommendation letter. "But more importantly, he has the compassion and resilience to make a real difference in the world." When Jaden wasn't working on his applications, he was studying for exams or helping Martha with household tasks. The balance was challenging, but he managed it with determination and grace. "Do you ever rest?" Martha teased him one evening as he helped her fold laundry. "Not until I get into college," he replied with a grin. As spring approached, the results began to roll in. Jaden received acceptance letters from several universities, each one sparking celebrations in their small but cozy home. But the one letter he was most anxious about hadn't arrived yet: his application to MIT. One afternoon, as he walked home from school, he spotted the mail carrier at the end of their street. His heart raced as he quickened his pace, arriving at their mailbox just as the carrier finished her route. "Good luck," she said with a knowing smile, handing him the stack of envelopes. Jaden sorted through them quickly, his breath catching when he saw the MIT logo on one of the envelopes. He clutched it tightly as he ran inside, calling for Martha. "Mom, it's here!" Martha emerged from her bedroom, her face lighting up at the sight of her son's excitement. "Well, don't just stand there, sweetheart, open it." Jaden tore open the envelope, his hands shaking. He unfolded the letter and scanned the first few lines, his eyes widening. "Dear Jaden Brown," he read aloud, his voice trembling. "We are thrilled to offer you admission to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology for the upcoming academic year." Martha let out a joyful cry, pulling him into a tight hug. "Oh, Jaden, I knew you could do it." Tears streamed down Jaden's face as he clung to his mother. "I couldn't have done it without you, Mom. This is for us." The months leading up to his departure for MIT were bittersweet. Jaden was thrilled at the opportunity ahead of him, but the thought of leaving Martha weighed heavily on his heart. "You'll be okay without me, right?" he asked her one evening as they packed his belongings. Martha smiled, though her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I'll miss you every day, Jaden, but I'll be okay. This is your time to shine." They spent their final weeks together making memories, visiting their favorite park, cooking family recipes, and sharing long conversations on the porch. On the day Jaden left for MIT, the entire neighborhood gathered to see him off. Ms. Carter and Mr. Roberts were there, along with Mrs. Thompson, who had become more like family than a caretaker. "You're going to do great things, Jaden," Mrs. Thompson said as she hugged him tightly. Jaden turned to Martha, his eyes filling with tears. "I'll call you every day, Mom." "I promise," Martha pulled him into one last embrace. "I know you will, sweetheart. Go make me proud." As the car pulled away, taking Jaden to his new future, Martha stood on the porch, waving until he was out of sight. Her heart ached with the weight of goodbye, but it also soared with pride. Her son was on his way to changing the world, and she knew that no matter how far he went, their bond would remain unbreakable. The sprawling campus of MIT was a world unlike anything Jaden had ever experienced. The towering buildings, bustling with students and professors from around the globe, felt both intimidating and exhilarating. His first few weeks were a blur of orientation events, rigorous coursework, and late nights in the dormitory study lounges. Despite the overwhelming workload, Jaden thrived. His professors quickly recognized his aptitude, often calling on him during lectures and encouraging him to dive deeper into research opportunities. "Brown, your analysis on the quantum mechanics problem set was exceptional," his physics professor, Dr. Lin, told him after class one day. "Have you considered joining one of the labs? We could use someone with your skills." Jaden nodded, excitement bubbling in his chest. "I'd love to, Professor. Thank you for the opportunity." He called Martha that evening, his voice buzzing with energy as he shared the news. "Mom, guess what?" he began, pacing his small dorm room. "I got invited to work in a research lab." Martha's laughter filled the line, warm and full of pride. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. I knew they'd see how special you are." "I wish you could see this place," Jaden said, his voice softening. "It's like a whole other world, but I miss home." "And I miss you," Martha replied, her voice tinged with emotion. "But I'm so proud of you, Jaden. You're exactly where you're meant to be." Back at home, Martha's life took on a quieter rhythm. With Mrs. Thompson's continued help, she managed her treatments and daily tasks. Her health remained stable, and she filled her days with small joys, gardening in the backyard, attending church, and keeping in touch with neighbors who often stopped by to check on her. Though the house felt emptier without Jaden's constant presence, Martha found comfort in their nightly phone calls. Jaden's stories of his adventures at MIT brought life to her evenings, making the distance between them feel smaller. "Today we ran an experiment with lasers," Jaden said during one call, his excitement palpable even through the phone. "It felt like something out of a sci-fi movie," Martha chuckled, picturing her son in a gleaming lab surrounded by futuristic equipment. "You're living your dream, sweetheart," she said, "and that makes me so happy." Jaden's dedication to his studies paid off in more ways than one. By the end of his first year, he had earned a coveted spot in an advanced research program, working closely with a team of graduate students and professors. The program provided a stipend, which Jaden sent home to Martha, insisting that she use it for anything she needed. "Jaden, this is your money," Martha protested during one of their calls. "You've earned it. Spend it on yourself." "But I wouldn't even be here if it weren't for you," Jaden argued. "Please, Mom, let me do this for you." Reluctantly, Martha agreed, though she secretly saved most of the money, knowing how much Jaden might need it in the future. As the years passed, Jaden continued to excel, earning scholarships and awards that solidified his reputation as one of the brightest minds in his field. His dream of becoming a doctor grew closer with each achievement, but his heart remained firmly rooted at home with Martha. During school breaks, Jaden returned to their modest house, spending hours catching up with his mother and helping her with household projects. Together, they painted the living room, planted flowers in the garden, and cooked elaborate meals that filled the house with warmth and laughter. "Remember when we tried making lasagna for the first time?" Martha said one evening as they worked side by side in the kitchen. Jaden laughed, his smile wide. "And we forgot to cook the noodles first? That was a disaster." "It's a wonder we didn't break our teeth," Martha said, her laughter ringing out. One summer, during his final year at MIT, Jaden received news that would change their lives. He had been accepted into Harvard Medical School, a dream he had scarcely dared to believe could come true. He called Martha the moment he received the email, his voice trembling with emotion. "Mom, I got in," he said, barely able to contain his tears. "I'm going to Harvard." Martha gasped, her own tears flowing freely. "Oh, Jaden, I'm so proud of you. You've worked so hard for this." That evening, they celebrated with a simple but heartfelt dinner at home. Jaden raised his glass of sparkling cider, his eyes shining with gratitude. "To you, Mom," he said, "for being my strength and my inspiration." Martha smiled, her heart full. "And to you, Jaden, for proving that anything is possible with hard work and faith." As Jaden prepared to leave for medical school, Martha began to reflect on the journey that had brought them to this point. The struggles they had faced, from Tyler's abuse to her battle with cancer, felt like distant memories compared to the joy of seeing her son achieve his dreams. "You've come so far, sweetheart," she told him one evening as they sat on the porch watching the stars. "And I know you're going to go even further." "I couldn't have done it without you, Mom," Jaden replied, his voice steady. "Everything I am is because of you." Martha reached for his hand, her touch warm and reassuring. "And everything I've done has been for you, Jaden. You've always been my greatest blessing." Harvard Medical School presented Jaden with challenges he had never encountered before. The grueling schedule, the weight of responsibility, and the constant demand for excellence tested his resilience in ways even MIT hadn't. Yet, he approached every challenge with the same determination that had carried him through so many obstacles in life. His professors noticed his unwavering focus and genuine passion for medicine. Dr. Elena Ramirez, a renowned oncologist and one of Jaden's mentors, often praised his empathy and work ethic. "Jaden," she said one afternoon after a particularly rigorous lab session, "you have something special. It's not just your intelligence, it's the way you connect with people. That will make you an extraordinary doctor." Jaden smiled modestly, but her words stayed with him. He thought about Martha and how her strength and love had taught him to be compassionate, even in the face of adversity. Back home, Martha's health remained stable, though the years had begun to take their toll. She spent her days tending to her garden, volunteering at the church, and writing letters to Jaden. The letters were her way of staying close to him, sharing her thoughts and prayers even when their busy schedules didn't allow for long phone calls. "Dear Jaden," she wrote in one letter, "I hope this finds you well and thriving, as always. The garden is in full bloom now, roses, daisies, and even the sunflowers you planted years ago. They're taller than me. Every time I see them, I think of you and how much you've grown. I'm so proud of you, my boy. You're living the dream we talked about all those years ago, and I know you're making a difference in the world. Keep shining, Jaden. You have so much light to give. Love always." Mom Jaden kept every letter in a small wooden box on his desk. On the hardest days, when the weight of his studies threatened to overwhelm him, he would open the box and reread her words, finding comfort and strength in her unwavering belief in him. During his second year of medical school, Jaden began his clinical rotations. The experience of working directly with patients was both exhilarating and humbling. He spent long hours in the oncology ward, assisting with treatments and learning the delicate balance between medical expertise and emotional support. One afternoon, he was assigned to a patient who reminded him of Martha. The woman, Ms. Wilson, was in her 60s and battling an aggressive form of cancer. Despite her frailty, she had a warm smile and a sharp wit that instantly reminded Jaden of home. "Dr. Brown?" she teased one day, though he was still just a student. "You've got a good bedside manner. Must be all those years of charm school." Jaden laughed, adjusting her IV with practiced care. "No charm school, Ms. Wilson. Just a very wise mom who taught me to be kind." "Well, she did a fine job," Ms. Wilson replied, her eyes twinkling despite the pain. "Don't let this place turn you into one of those cold clinical types. We need more doctors who actually care." Jaden nodded, her words striking a chord. He thought of Martha, her sacrifices, and the way she had always put love and compassion above all else. When Jaden called Martha that evening, his voice was heavy with emotion. "Mom, I had a patient today who reminded me of you," he said. "She's going through a tough time, but she's still so kind and strong." Martha's voice softened. "That's because strength doesn't always look like muscles, Jaden. Sometimes it's just getting up every day and choosing to keep going." "You've always been the strongest person I know," Jaden said, his voice breaking slightly. "And you're my reason for that strength," Martha replied. "I'm so proud of the man you've become." By his final year of medical school, Jaden had solidified his place as one of the top students in his class. He was offered a residency position at a prestigious hospital in Boston, a dream opportunity that came with its own set of challenges. "I'll be closer to home," Jaden told Martha during one of their calls, "but the hours are going to be brutal." "Don't worry about me, sweetheart," Martha said. "I've got Mrs. Thompson, the church ladies, and the garden to keep me busy. You just focus on being the best doctor you can be." Jaden laughed softly. "You make it sound so simple." "Because it is," Martha said with a smile in her voice. "You've already faced so much, Jaden. This is just the next step in the journey." On the day of his graduation, Jaden stood on the stage in his cap and gown, the bright lights of the auditorium reflecting off his proud smile. As he accepted his diploma, his mind flashed back to the many moments that had brought him here, the nights he spent studying by Martha's side, the tears they shed together, and the hope that had carried them through every challenge. In the audience, Martha sat with Mrs. Thompson, her hands clasped tightly together. Her heart swelled with pride as she watched her son achieve what had once seemed impossible. When the ceremony ended, Jaden found her outside, standing beneath a canopy of trees. He wrapped her in a tight hug, his voice thick with emotion. "We did it, Mom," he whispered. "No, sweetheart," Martha said, pulling back to look into his eyes. "You did it, and I couldn't be prouder." Jaden's residency was demanding, but he approached it with the same determination and compassion that had defined his journey so far. He specialized in oncology, inspired by the challenges Martha had faced and the care she had received. Every day, he worked tirelessly to make a difference in his patients' lives, carrying with him the lessons his mother had taught him: to be strong, to be kind, and to never lose hope. As Jaden delved deeper into his residency, the days seemed to blur together. The long hours in the hospital, the constant beeping of monitors, and the quiet conversations with patients became his new normal. Yet, no matter how exhausted he was, he never forgot to call Martha at least once a day. "Hi, Mom," he'd say, his voice a mixture of weariness and warmth. "How are you feeling today?" "I'm fine, sweetheart," Martha would reply, her voice steady despite the occasional cough that betrayed her lingering frailty. "The garden's looking beautiful. The roses are in full bloom. You'll see them when you visit next month." "I can't wait," Jaden would respond, a smile creeping into his voice. "I miss home." "And I miss you," Martha would say, her words filled with love. "But I'm so proud of you, Jaden. You're exactly where you're meant to be." One evening, after a particularly difficult shift, Jaden sat in the hospital's break room, staring at his phone. His mind was heavy with the weight of the day's events. He had lost a patient, a young woman with a promising future. No amount of medical expertise could have saved her, but the loss still stung. He hesitated before dialing Martha's number, unsure if he could keep his emotions in check. "Jaden," Martha's voice was as bright as ever, instantly comforting him. "I was just thinking about you." "Hey, Mom," Jaden said, his voice softer than usual. I needed to hear your voice." Martha immediately sensed that something was wrong. "What happened, sweetheart?" Jaden hesitated, then let out a long sigh. "I lost a patient today. She was so young, Mom. It just doesn't seem fair." "Oh, Jaden," Martha said gently. "I'm so sorry. I know how hard that must be for you." "I did everything I could," Jaden continued, his voice cracking. "But it wasn't enough." Martha's voice was steady as she replied, "Sometimes, no matter how hard we try, the outcome isn't what we hoped for. That doesn't mean you failed, Jaden. It means you cared, and that's what makes you a great doctor." Her words settled over him like a warm blanket, easing the tightness in his chest. "Thanks, Mom," he said, his voice thick with gratitude. I needed to hear that. Back home, Martha continued to live a quiet but fulfilling life. Her garden flourished, her days punctuated by visits from neighbors and church friends. Mrs. Thompson remained a constant presence, helping with errands and ensuring Martha had everything she needed. One sunny afternoon, Martha sat on the porch with Mrs. Thompson, sipping iced tea and flipping through a photo album. The pages were filled with pictures of Jaden, first as a baby, then a young boy, and finally the confident man he had become. "He's done so much," Martha said, her voice tinged with awe. "Sometimes I still can't believe how far he's come." "And he couldn't have done it without you," Mrs. Thompson replied with a smile. "You've been his rock, Martha." Martha's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of pride. "He's my greatest blessing," she said softly. As the years passed, Jaden completed his residency and began working as a full-fledged oncologist at one of Boston's most prestigious hospitals. His reputation as a compassionate and skilled doctor quickly grew, and his patients often spoke of the warmth and empathy he brought to their care. Despite his demanding career, Jaden made regular trips home to see Martha. Each visit was a celebration, filled with laughter, home-cooked meals, and long talks on the porch. During one visit, as they sat under the stars, Martha turned to Jaden with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever think about starting a family of your own?" she asked gently. Jaden chuckled, scratching the back of his neck. "I've been a little busy, Mom." Martha smiled. "I know, sweetheart. But you deserve to have someone by your side. Someone who makes you as happy as you've made me." "I'll think about it," Jaden promised, though his tone was teasing. Martha patted his hand. "You have so much love to give, Jaden. Don't keep it all to yourself." Years later, during one particularly beautiful spring, Jaden surprised Martha with a special announcement. "Mom," he said one evening as they sat in the garden surrounded by blooming flowers, "I've been seeing someone." Martha's eyes lit up. "Oh, Jaden, that's wonderful. Tell me everything." Her excitement made Jaden laugh. "Her name's Emily," he said. "She's a pediatric nurse. We met at the hospital." "She sounds lovely," Martha said, her voice full of warmth. "When do I get to meet her?" "Soon," Jaden promised. True to his word, Jaden brought Emily to visit a few weeks later. Martha welcomed her with open arms, instantly charmed by the young woman's kindness and humor. "You're just as wonderful as Jaden said," Martha told Emily during dinner. "And you're even more amazing than he described," Emily replied with a smile. The evening was filled with laughter and stories, and by the end of the night, Martha felt as though she had gained a daughter. As Jaden's life continued to flourish, so did Martha's pride in him. She often reflected on the journey they had taken together, the struggles, the triumphs, and the love that had carried them through it all. "You've made me so proud, Jaden. she told him one evening as they sat on the porch, the setting sun casting a warm glow over their modest home. "I couldn't have asked for a better son." "And I couldn't have asked for a better mom," Jaden replied, his voice filled with emotion. They sat in comfortable silence, the bond between them stronger than ever. The years rolled on, bringing new milestones and cherished memories for Jaden and Martha. Emily became a constant presence in their lives, her warmth and humor blending seamlessly with the bond Jaden and Martha shared. The couple eventually announced their engagement during a quiet dinner at Martha's house. "Mom," Jaden began, his voice tinged with nervous excitement, "Emily and I have something to tell you." Martha, who had been pouring tea, looked up with a curious smile. "What is it, sweetheart?" Jaden reached for Emily's hand, his face lighting up as he spoke. "We're getting married." Martha's eyes widened, and for a moment she was silent. Then tears welled up as a radiant smile spread across her face. "Oh, Jaden, Emily, that's wonderful news." She rose from her chair, pulling them both into a warm embrace. Emily laughed, her voice full of affection. "I think you're more excited than we are, Martha." Martha wiped her tears with the corner of her sleeve. "Of course I am. This is a dream come true." The months leading up to the wedding were a flurry of preparations, with Martha eager to be involved in every detail. Though her energy wasn't what it used to be, she insisted on helping Emily pick out flowers, choose decorations, and even bake cookies for the engagement party. "Martha, you've already done so much," Emily said one afternoon as they sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by fabric swatches and flower catalogs. "Nonsense," Martha replied with a wave of her hand. "This is the happiest I've been in years. Let me enjoy every moment of it." Jaden, who was sitting nearby, smiled as he watched the two women chat like old friends. Seeing them together filled him with gratitude. It was everything he had hoped for and more. The wedding day arrived on a crisp autumn morning, the air filled with the scent of fallen leaves and the soft hum of excitement. The ceremony was held in the church where Martha had spent so many Sundays praying for Jaden's success and happiness. As she walked into the sanctuary, her arm linked with Jaden's, Martha felt an overwhelming sense of pride and contentment. The pews were filled with family, friends, and colleagues who had supported them through the years. "You look beautiful, Mom," Jaden whispered as they reached her seat at the front of the church. "And you look so handsome," Martha replied, her eyes glistening with tears. The ceremony was simple, but heartfelt. Emily walked down the aisle in a flowing white dress, her smile radiant as she joined Jaden at the altar. The vows they exchanged were a testament to their love and shared commitment to building a future together. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the room erupted in applause, and Martha clapped the loudest of all. At the reception, Martha took the microphone to give a toast. She stood with confidence, her frailty forgotten in the glow of the moment. "To my son, Jaden, and my new daughter, Emily," she began, her voice steady. "You two are a perfect match. Kind, compassionate, and full of love. Watching you start this new chapter together fills my heart with more joy than I can put into words." She paused, her eyes misting as she looked at Jaden. "Jaden, you've been my greatest blessing. You've taught me what it means to be strong, to persevere, and to believe in the power of love. And Emily, thank you for loving him as much as I do." The room was silent for a moment, the weight of her words settling over the crowd. Then a wave of applause and cheers broke out, echoing through the hall. Jaden hugged Martha tightly, his voice filled with emotion. "I love you, Mom. Thank you for everything." In the years that followed, Jaden and Emily built a life filled with love, hard work, and dreams. They purchased a modest home not far from the hospital where they both worked, ensuring they could visit Martha often. Martha's health remained stable, and she relished every moment she spent with her growing family. She was there to celebrate Jaden's promotions, Emily's accomplishments, and the arrival of their first child, a beautiful baby girl they named Grace. "Grace," Martha whispered as she held the baby for the first time. Her hands trembled slightly, but her smile was steady. What a perfect name. She's a gift from above. Jaden and Emily exchanged a glance, their eyes filled with gratitude. We thought so too, Jaden said, and we wanted her to have a name that reminded us of you. Martha looked up at her son, her heart full. You've made me so proud, Jaden, and now you're giving me the greatest gift of all, a chance to be a grandmother. Grace's arrival brought new joy to Martha's life. Though her energy was limited, she spent every moment she could with her granddaughter, teaching her nursery rhymes, baking cookies, and telling stories about Jaden's childhood. She's just like you were, Martha told Jaden one afternoon as they watched Grace toddle around the garden. Curious, fearless, and full of mischief. Jaden laughed, shaking his head. Let's hope she doesn't get into as much trouble as I did. She'll be just fine, Martha said with a wink. She's got the best parents in the world. As Grace grew, so did the bond between the 3 generations of the Brown family. Martha often reflected on how far they had come, from the days of struggle and uncertainty to the present, where their lives were filled with love, stability, and hope. One evening, as she sat on the porch with Jaden, Emily, and Grace, Martha took a deep breath, letting the cool air fill her lungs. You know, she said softly, her voice carrying a note of contentment, this is everything I ever prayed for. A happy home, a loving family, and a future full of promise. Jaden reached for her hand, his touch gentle and reassuring. And it's all because of you, Mom. You made this possible. Martha smiled, her eyes shining with pride and love. We made it possible. Together. The Brown household was filled with warmth and laughter, the sounds of Grace's giggles echoing through the halls as Martha showed her how to roll out cookie dough on the kitchen counter. The child's hands, covered in flour, clumsily mimicked her grandmother's careful movements. You're doing great, sweetheart, Martha said, her voice steady but soft, filled with love. Her health had stabilized, though her energy waned faster these days. Yet she never let that stop her from creating memories with Grace. Jaden and Emily often watched from the doorway, their hearts full as they saw the bond forming between the two. She adores her, Emily whispered one evening as they stood side by side, watching Grace snuggle against Martha while listening to one of her stories. Jaden nodded. Mom's been through so much. Seeing her happy like this, it means everything. As Grace grew, her curiosity and boundless energy kept everyone on their toes. Martha delighted in answering her endless questions about the garden, the stars, and the world around her. Why do flowers sleep at night, Grandma? Grace asked one evening, her tiny fingers brushing the petals of a daisy. Martha chuckled, kneeling beside her. Because they need rest, just like us. So they can wake up strong and beautiful in the morning. The little girl nodded solemnly, as if she'd just been entrusted with a great secret. When Jaden received news of his promotion to lead oncologist, the entire family celebrated with a small gathering at home. Martha raised a glass of sparkling cider, her eyes twinkling with pride. To Jaden, she said, her voice steady despite the emotion welling up inside her. You've turned every challenge into an opportunity and every loss into a lesson. You're not just a brilliant doctor, you're a remarkable son and father. Jaden's voice caught as he replied, And I learned all of that from you, Mom. The years passed, and while Grace grew taller and stronger, Martha's health began to decline. The once bright sparkle in her eyes dimmed slightly, though her spirit remained as fierce as ever. One autumn afternoon, as the leaves turned golden and crisp, Martha sat in her favorite armchair, her hands resting in her lap. Grace sat at her feet, carefully reading aloud from a storybook. Grandma, Grace said, looking up with wide, curious eyes, did you always know Daddy would be a doctor? Martha smiled faintly, her gaze drifting to the window where the garden swayed gently in the breeze. Not at first, she admitted. But I always knew he'd do something extraordinary. He's always had the kindest heart, even when he was your age. Jaden, standing quietly in the doorway, overheard the exchange. His chest tightened as he watched his mother and daughter together, the two people who had shaped his life in immeasurable ways. In her final days, Martha insisted on staying at home, surrounded by the family she loved so deeply. Emily, Jaden, and Grace took turns sitting by her side, holding her hand and sharing stories that filled the room with laughter and tears. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant hues of orange and pink, Martha gently squeezed Jaden's hand. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but her words carried the weight of a lifetime. "Jaden," she said, her eyes meeting his with unwavering love, "promise me you'll keep making the world a better place. For Grace, for everyone." Jaden's throat tightened, and he nodded, his own tears falling freely. "I promise, Mom. You've taught me how." When Martha passed peacefully in her sleep a few days later, the Brown family gathered to honor her life with a quiet celebration, filled with the same love and resilience she had always exemplified. Grace helped plant a rose bush in the garden in her grandmother's memory, carefully patting down the soil with her small hands. "She'll always be with us, won't she, Daddy?" Grace asked, looking up at Jaden. Jaden knelt beside her, pulling her into a gentle embrace. "Always," he assured her, "in everything we do." Years later, as Jaden sat in his office reviewing patient files, he glanced at the small photograph on his desk. It was of Martha, holding Grace as a baby, her smile as radiant as ever. The image served as a daily reminder of the lessons she had taught him, about compassion, perseverance, and the enduring power of love. That evening, as he walked into the garden where Grace, now a teenager, was helping Emily water the flowers, he felt the same overwhelming sense of gratitude he always did. The legacy his mother had left behind was not just in the family she had raised, but in the values she had instilled. As the family sat down together for dinner, laughter and warmth filled the room, just as Martha had always wanted. The life they had built was a testament to her strength and love, a legacy that would endure for generations to come. The garden behind the house was a reflection of Martha, resilient, beautiful, and full of life. The flowers she had planted years ago continued to bloom with vibrancy, a constant reminder of her care and dedication. Jaden spent each evening balancing his time between his patients and his family, striving to uphold the harmony his mother had taught him to cherish. Grace, now a teenager brimming with curiosity and energy, often spent time in the garden, tending to the plants and talking to her father about her day. "Dad?" Grace asked one evening as she watered the roses, her voice thoughtful. "Do you think Grandma would be proud of me?" Jaden paused, leaning against the wooden fence that bordered the garden. He looked at his daughter, her features so reminiscent of his mother's strength and kindness. "She'd be more than proud, Grace," he said softly. "She'd be amazed at the person you're becoming." The evening air was cool and carried the faint scent of blooming jasmine. Grace smiled, her gaze shifting to the rose bush they had planted in Martha's memory. "I miss her," she admitted, her voice tinged with emotion. Jaden moved closer, resting a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "I do too," he said. "But every time we share kindness with someone, or take care of this garden, or even laugh together, it's like we're keeping her with us." Emily appeared in the doorway, calling them in for dinner. The table was set with the familiar dishes that Martha had once prepared with so much love. As they sat down together, the sense of connection was palpable. Over the years, Jaden's work at the hospital had grown to include initiatives that expanded access to oncology care in underserved communities. Inspired by his own experiences with his mother's struggle, he worked tirelessly to ensure that no family would have to face the same barriers they once had. One evening, Jaden was invited to speak at a medical conference. As he addressed the audience, sharing his journey and his commitment to compassionate care, he thought of Martha. Her resilience and sacrifices had paved the way for everything he had achieved. "My mother," he told the room, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "was the strongest person I've ever known. She taught me that even in the face of hardship, love and determination can create something extraordinary. Every patient I see, every life I touch, is part of the legacy she left behind. The audience erupted into applause, but Jaden's thoughts remained with his family. Later that night, as he returned home, Emily and Grace greeted him with hugs. "Did Grandma inspire your speech tonight?" Grace asked, her eyes bright with curiosity. Jaden smiled, ruffling her hair gently. "She inspires everything I do," he replied. In the years that followed, the Brown family continued to grow and thrive. Grace went on to pursue a degree in environmental science, inspired by the time she spent in the garden with her grandmother. Emily expanded her own career in medical research, often collaborating with Jaden on community health projects. One crisp autumn day, Jaden found himself sitting in the garden, now a lush sanctuary filled with vibrant flowers and fragrant herbs. He held a cup of tea, the steam curling in the cool air, and closed his eyes for a moment, letting the peaceful sounds of rustling leaves and chirping birds wash over him. "Grandma would love how the garden looks now," Grace said, sitting down beside him with a notebook in her lap. Jaden nodded, his gaze resting on the rose bush that stood as the centerpiece of the garden. "She'd be proud of us," he said quietly. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, the family gathered outside to share stories and laughter. The legacy of love, resilience, and hope that Martha had nurtured in them continued to flourish, woven into every moment they shared. The Brown family, bound by the strength of their connections and the lessons of their past, carried Martha's spirit with them in everything they did. Her influence remained a guiding light, shaping their lives and the lives they touched along the way. The years stretched onward, bringing new milestones and memories for the Brown family. Grace's teenage years were marked by her unwavering curiosity and determination, traits she had clearly inherited from both her father and her late grandmother. Jaden often marveled at how his daughter carried Martha's quiet strength, especially during moments of challenge. One spring morning, Grace was preparing for her high school science fair. The kitchen table was covered in poster boards, beakers, and carefully labeled vials of soil samples. Jaden watched from the doorway, sipping his coffee with a proud smile. "What's the topic this year?" he asked, stepping closer to inspect her work. Grace looked up, her cheeks flushing with excitement. "I'm studying how different soil compositions affect plant growth," she explained, gesturing to her carefully tended samples. "Grandma always said the garden's success depended on the care we gave the earth. I wanted to test it out for myself." Jaden chuckled, ruffling her hair. "She'd love this, Grace. You've got her sense of curiosity and care for the world." The science fair was a resounding success. Grace's project not only earned her top marks but also caught the attention of local environmental organizations. When she presented her findings to a panel of judges, she spoke with the same confidence and warmth that Martha had always encouraged. "I dedicated this project to my grandmother," she said during her closing remarks, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "She taught me to respect the earth, to nurture it the way we nurture each other. This is my way of continuing her work." Jaden sat in the audience, his heart swelling with pride. As the applause filled the auditorium, he felt a deep sense of connection to his mother's legacy, carried forward through Grace's passion and dedication. At home that evening, Grace placed her ribbon and certificate on the mantel next to a framed photograph of Martha. "She's still with us," Grace said softly, her fingers brushing the frame. "She always will be," Jaden replied, his voice filled with certainty. As the seasons changed, so did the rhythm of their lives. Emily's work in medical research led to breakthroughs that earned her recognition in her field, while Jaden continued to balance his clinical practice with his community outreach programs. Grace, now in her final year of high school, began preparing for college applications. Often seeking advice from her parents as she crafted essays and chose schools. One evening, as the family sat together in the living room, Grace hesitated before speaking. "I've been thinking about what I want to do in college," she began, her voice tentative. Emily set down her cup of tea, giving her daughter her full attention. "We're listening," she said with a gentle smile. Grace looked between her parents, her determination evident. I want to study environmental science, she said firmly. I want to help protect the planet, just like Grandma would have wanted. Jaden felt a lump rise in his throat. She'd be so proud of you, Grace, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Emily nodded, reaching for her daughter's hand. We're proud of you, too. Whatever you choose to do, we'll always support you. The months that followed were filled with college visits, applications, and countless late-night conversations. Grace's passion for her chosen field shone through in every essay she wrote and every interview she attended. When the acceptance letters began to arrive, the entire family celebrated each milestone with joy and gratitude. Grandma would be dancing in the garden right now, Grace joked one evening as they opened yet another acceptance letter. She'd probably be planting something new to mark the occasion, Jaden added with a laugh. By the time Grace left for college, the Brown household felt quieter, but no less vibrant. Jaden and Emily adjusted to the new rhythm of their lives, finding joy in their shared projects and the memories they continued to create. One crisp autumn afternoon, Jaden received an invitation to speak at a national medical conference about his outreach programs. The honor was a testament to the impact of his work, and he accepted with humility and pride. On the day of the conference, Jaden stood before a packed auditorium, the weight of his journey settling over him as he adjusted the microphone. When I think about what brought me here, he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. I think of my mother, Martha Brown. She was my first teacher, my first inspiration, and the person who taught me that even the smallest acts of kindness can ripple outward to change lives. As he spoke, he felt a profound connection to his past and the path that had led him to this moment. The audience listened intently as Jaden shared stories of his childhood, his mother's resilience, and the lessons he carried with him into his work. Her strength, he concluded, is the reason I stand before you today. Everything I've done, every life I've touched, is part of her legacy. The room erupted into applause, but Jaden's thoughts were with his family. As he stepped off the stage, he saw Emily waiting for him in the wings, her smile radiant with pride. You were incredible, she said, pulling him into a tight hug. Jaden kissed her forehead. It's all because of her, he said softly. That evening, the family gathered for dinner, sharing stories and laughter under the warm glow of the dining room light. The legacy of love and resilience that Martha had built continued to flourish, woven into every moment of their lives. The days turned into weeks, and the rhythm of the Brown family's life continued to evolve. Grace, now well into her college studies, often called home to share her latest discoveries and experiences. Her excitement was contagious, and Jaden and Emily cherished every update, proud of the young woman she was becoming. One afternoon, as Jaden sat in his office reviewing patient charts, his phone buzzed with an incoming call. It was Grace. He immediately answered, smiling at the sound of her voice. Dad, guess what? She began, her tone filled with enthusiasm. What's going on, sweetheart? Jaden replied, leaning back in his chair. I was chosen to lead a research project on sustainable farming practices, Grace exclaimed. It's part of a collaboration between my university and a local community organization. Jaden's chest swelled with pride. That's incredible, Grace. I'm so proud of you. Your grandma would be too. I was thinking about her when I got the news, Grace admitted, her voice softening. Everything I've done feels like a way to honor her. You've done more than honor her, Jaden said. You've carried her spirit forward in ways she'd never have imagined. As the call ended, Jaden sat quietly for a moment, reflecting on how far their family had come. His thoughts drifted to the garden at home, where the rosebush planted in Martha's memory continued to bloom year after year. It was a symbol of resilience, much like their family itself. That evening, as he walked through the hospital halls, Jaden passed by the pediatric oncology ward. The sound of children laughing drew his attention, and he paused to watch as a group of young patients played with colorful blocks and toys. One little boy, no older than 6, looked up and waved. His bald head and the IV pole beside him were stark reminders of the battles he was facing, but his smile was bright and unyielding. Jaden felt a tug at his heart. He stepped inside, kneeling to greet the boy. "Hey there," he said warmly. "What are you building?" "A rocket ship," the boy replied, his voice filled with determination. "It's going to take me to the stars." Jaden chuckled, his admiration for the child's spirit evident. "I bet it'll be the best rocket ship out there." As he spent time with the children, Jaden was reminded of why he had chosen this path. Each life he touched, each moment of hope he could offer, was part of the legacy his mother had inspired. Back at home, Emily was waiting for him with a cup of tea and a warm smile. "You were late tonight," she said, handing him the mug. "I stopped by the pediatric ward," Jaden explained, sinking into the couch beside her. "There was this little boy building a rocket ship. He reminded me of Grace when she was younger." Emily leaned her head against his shoulder. "You always find time for everyone," she said. "That's one of the things I love most about you." Jaden smiled, resting his cheek against her hair. "It's because of Mom," he said softly. "She taught me that every moment of kindness matters." The next weekend, the family gathered in the garden, as they often did when Grace visited from college. The air was crisp, and the leaves had begun to turn shades of red and gold. Emily brought out a tray of freshly baked cookies, and Grace helped set up chairs around the patio table. "This place feels magical," Grace said, looking around at the vibrant flowers and neatly trimmed hedges. "It's like Grandma's still here." "She is," Jaden said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Every part of this garden holds a memory of her, and every moment we spend here, we're continuing her legacy." As the sun set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, the family sat together, sharing stories and laughter. The garden, much like their lives, was a testament to Martha's love and resilience. Grace's research project became a major success, earning her recognition not only at her university, but also within the environmental science community. Her findings on sustainable farming practices were published in a prestigious journal, and she was invited to present her work at a national conference. When she called home to share the news, Jaden and Emily were ecstatic. "You're making waves, Grace," Emily said proudly. "Your grandma would be over the moon." "I wouldn't have done any of this without you both," Grace replied. "You've always believed in me, just like Grandma did." The conference was a milestone for Grace, and Jaden made sure to be there to support her. Sitting in the audience, he watched as his daughter took the stage, her confidence shining through as she spoke about her work. Her passion was palpable, and Jaden felt an overwhelming sense of pride. Afterward, as they walked together through the conference center, Grace looked up at her father. "Do you think I'm making a difference?" she asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. Jaden stopped and turned to face her, placing his hands on her shoulders. "Grace, you're changing the world," he said firmly. "Every step you take, every effort you make, it all matters." As they returned home, Grace placed her conference badge next to the ribbon and certificate on the mantel. The display had grown over the years, a testament to her achievements and the legacy of love and support that had guided her. The Brown family's story continued to unfold, each chapter filled with hope, resilience, and the enduring power of connection. As the seasons passed, the Brown family found new ways to honor the memory of Martha while embracing the lives they were building. The garden remained a central gathering place, a sanctuary of love and reflection. Jaden often found solace there after long days at the hospital, tending to the flowers with the same care his mother had shown years before. One crisp spring morning, Jaden walked into the kitchen to find Emily at the table, her laptop open and a look of excitement on her face. "You're up early," he remarked, kissing her cheek before pouring himself a cup of coffee. "I was waiting for you," Emily said, spinning the laptop around so he could see the screen. "Look at this." Jaden leaned in, reading the announcement displayed on the screen. It was a call for medical professionals to participate in a global health initiative providing oncology care to underserved regions. The program promised to be rigorous with long hours and challenging conditions, but it also offered the chance to make a profound impact. "What do you think?" Emily asked, watching his expression closely. Jaden took a deep breath, the weight of the decision settling over him. "It's an incredible opportunity," he said slowly, "but it would mean being away for months at a time." Emily reached across the table to take his hand. "You've always wanted to bring care to those who need it most. This could be your chance to do something extraordinary." Jaden nodded, his mind already racing with possibilities. Later that evening, he sat down with Grace to share the news. "What do you think, kiddo?" he asked, his tone cautious. Grace, now in her final year of college, smiled warmly. "I think Grandma would have told you to go for it," she said. "You've always taught me to follow my passions. It's time you did the same." With his family's unwavering support, Jaden submitted his application and was soon accepted into the program. The months leading up to his departure were filled with preparation, from organizing his work at the hospital to ensuring that Emily and Grace had everything they needed while he was away. On the morning of his departure, the family gathered in the garden for breakfast, a tradition they had upheld since Grace was a child. The air was cool and the scent of blooming flowers filled the space. "I'm going to miss this," Jaden said, looking around at the vibrant colors and familiar faces. Emily squeezed his hand. "We'll keep it just as you left it," she promised. Grace leaned over to plant a kiss on his cheek. "Just come back with lots of stories," she said with a grin. Jaden's time with the Global Health Initiative was both challenging and rewarding. He traveled to remote villages and bustling cities, working alongside local healthcare providers to establish sustainable oncology programs. Each patient he treated reminded him of his mother's fight, her resilience driving him to give his all. In one particularly remote clinic, Jaden met a young girl named Amara who was undergoing treatment for leukemia. Her bright smile and unyielding spirit reminded him of Grace at her age. "Will I get better?" Amara asked one evening as he adjusted her IV. Jaden crouched beside her, his voice gentle but firm. "We're going to do everything we can to help you get better," he said. "You're one of the strongest people I've ever met." Amara beamed at his words, her optimism shining through despite the challenges she faced. When Jaden returned home after 6 months, he was greeted with open arms by Emily and Grace. The garden was in full bloom, a riot of colors that seemed to celebrate his homecoming. "I missed you both so much," he said, pulling them into a tight embrace. "We missed you too," Emily replied, her voice thick with emotion. Grace held up a photo album she had created during his time away. "I kept track of everything while you were gone," she said proudly. "You didn't miss a single moment." That evening, as they sat together in the garden, Jaden shared stories of his travels. Emily and Grace listened intently, their faces lighting up at his tales of hope and resilience. In the months that followed, Jaden continued to balance his work at the hospital with his newfound passion for global health. He often gave talks about his experiences, inspiring others to pursue similar paths. One day, Grace approached him with an idea. "What if we started a scholarship in Grandma's name?" she suggested. "It could help students who want to study medicine or environmental science but don't have the resources." Jaden's eyes widened at the thought. "She would have loved that," he said, his voice filled with pride. "Let's do it." The Martha Brown Memorial Scholarship became a reality within a year, thanks to the combined efforts of the family and their community. The first recipients were 2 young women with dreams of becoming doctors, their gratitude evident as they met the Browns at the inaugural award ceremony. "This is all because of her," Jaden said during his speech, his voice steady but emotional. "My mother taught me the value of compassion, resilience, and the power of giving back. This scholarship is our way of carrying her legacy forward." As the years passed, the scholarship program grew, touching countless lives and ensuring that Martha's influence would continue for generations to come. As the years unfolded, the Brown family's legacy of love, resilience, and compassion touched lives far beyond their own. Grace graduated with honors, dedicating her career to environmental restoration projects that brought life back to struggling communities. Jaden, now a respected figure in global health and oncology, continued to balance his professional achievements with the warmth of his family life. Every holiday, the family gathered in the garden, where the rosebush planted in Martha's memory bloomed brighter than ever. It stood as a testament to her enduring influence, a symbol of how one life, filled with kindness and determination, could ripple outward to inspire so many. As Jaden sat with Emily and Grace under the golden glow of the evening sun, he smiled at the laughter surrounding him, the love that bound them all together. "Mom was right," he said softly, his voice carrying both pride and gratitude. "Where there's love, there's always hope." The legacy of Martha Brown lived on, woven into every decision, every triumph, and every quiet moment of reflection. It was a life well lived, passed down through her family, ensuring that her spirit would never fade.